When government spends your money, why do these multi-billion-dollar public projects, well, consistently miss every target, spiral into staggering cost overruns, and operate entirely hidden from public view? That's really the core question we're tackling today. We're doing a deep dive into uh, a stack of sources detailing these fiscal accountability nightmares. We're focusing particularly on in systemic waste and spending inefficiency, especially in California. And we aren't here to just discuss, routine budget adjustments.
No.
We are looking at what seems like a fundamental failure to responsibly manage monumental public works.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, I think, is the sheer velocity, the scale of the financial damage. And it's coupled with what these sources suggest is a deliberate, almost institutional evasion of accountability. So our mission today is to try and understand the mechanics of how these massive projects, from high-speed rail to legislative office renovations, how they inflate in cost, while at the same time apparently circumventing crucial transparency and environmental standards.
And the numbers, they're just staggering right out of the gate. They really set the stage for, well, the next few years of fiscal debate, I'd imagine. Let's start with that California high-speed rail project. The estimated full cost surged from an initial projection of, $33 billion
Around there, yeah.
to an astronomical $128 billion.
$128 billion. And here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe alarming. $15 billion of taxpayer money was spent before a single mile of operational high-speed track was actually laid.
$15 billion.
$15 billion. And that initial segment, the one intended to run 171 miles from Merced to Bakersfield, that alone has already ballooned to a projected $35 billion.
Wow.
And possibly hitting $38.5 billion even.
That level of cost growth, it demands an answer beyond just simple inflation, doesn't it? What do the federal regulators say? The people who are supposed to be the experts here, what was their take on this particular failure?
Well, the accountability perspective, it's pretty ruthless. The Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, they actually stepped in. And they concluded that the High-Speed Rail Authority, the state body, lacked a viable plan to complete the project.
A viable plan?
Yeah, and couldn't meet the requirements of the federal grant agreements. They publicly labeled the project a boondoggle. That's strong language from a federal agency.
Right.
And this regulatory failure, it led directly to the termination of $4 billion in unspent federal funds.
So this wasn't just, political squabbling. This was a technical assessment saying the state basically couldn't deliver.
Precisely. The FRA cited a $7 billion funding gap just for that first segment. And a core issue, according to critics and our sources, was that the project decisions seemed to have been driven more by political necessity. Meaning choosing routes based on, say, legislative feasibility, getting enough votes, rather than pure engineering viability or cost-effectiveness.
Aha!
So when political ambition sort of overrules the engineering and the fiscal reality, well, you get a $128 billion hole before a train even leaves the station.
Okay, so if California can't efficiently build essential infrastructure like that, what happens when they turn that same kind of, reckless spending and maybe poor planning inward to renovate their own halls of power? Let's shift to the Capitol Annex project. This renovation for legislative offices, it was initially sold to the public as a $543 million refurbishment.
Yeah, that number didn't last long. That budget was immediately disregarded, it seems. The cost quickly vaulted to more than $1.1 billion.
Over $1 billion.
$1 billion. And you have to keep in mind, this massive expenditure on the state's own legislative offices happened while the state was grappling with a chronic multi-billion-dollar budget deficit.
Right.
So critics, unsurprisingly, were quick to label this a billion-dollar boondoggle, too, suggesting, profound fiscal irresponsibility.
It really underscores that lack of a responsible guiding force, doesn't it? If the state can't maintain fiscal discipline on its own building renovations while facing a deficit, how can we expect that same lack of control to play out in really complex social issues? And the housing and homelessness crisis seems like a perfect, if tragic, example.
Absolutely. The sources reveal that despite spending over $22 billion on housing and homelessness programs, this was over a 4-year period.
$22 billion.
Yes. Construction goals were missed by a staggering 87%. And the problems, unfortunately, just worsened.
And this is where the cost per unit becomes, well, frankly, mind-boggling for you, the taxpayer. What are the actual costs of these so-called affordable housing projects?
They are ridiculously high. I mean, we're talking about building a single one-bedroom affordable apartment unit in Los Angeles costing $837,000.
800,000 for one apartment.
Yeah, and with projections that those costs could rise to $1 million by the time they're actually completed.
$1 million.
And it's not an isolated case. A similar ambitious project down in Solana Beach was eventually shelved after its per-unit cost hit $1.1 million.
It's unbelievable.
And even renovating existing, older San Francisco apartments exceeded $1 million per unit in some cases.
Okay, just for context, though, if you were building, say, market rate, maybe even luxury apartments in those same areas, what's the comparable cost? Is this just the price of construction or?
No, it's really not. Sources indicate that the median cost to build a luxury market rate condo in these same urban areas is often significantly lower than the cost being paid for these quote-unquote affordable units.
So where's the money going?
Well, when you see that massive gap, it raises serious questions, right? Is it bureaucracy, poor bidding practices, regulatory overhead, maybe a combination of all three?
It certainly suggests the money is sinking into, well, inefficiency rather than actually solving the problem on the ground.
It really highlights a profound failure of oversight. You see, the state established a new housing accountability unit specifically to manage these funds and projects. Yet critics observe that this unit appears to pay, and I'm quoting here, no attention to costs. It demonstrates a profound failure of oversight on billions of taxpayer dollars meant to alleviate a humanitarian crisis.
That pattern, that reckless spending, it inevitably leads to the next crucial element, doesn't it? Which is the institutional desire maybe to hide the results.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move into how state officials deliberately obscured information about these cost explosions, starting back at that $1.1 billion Capitol Annex renovation.
Right, and this is where we kind of shift from maybe incompetence or inefficiency to something that looks more like active concealment. Transparency in the Capitol Annex project was systematically suppressed. We know that a stunning 2,093 people associated with the renovation, this is everyone from contractors to staff, were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, NDAs.
Over 2,000 people silenced. Why would state officials impose NDAs on a public project funded by taxpayer dollars? That seems counterintuitive.
It really does. It looks like an institutional refusal to disclose cost details, construction difficulties, timelines, basically anything sensitive to the public and the media. NDAs are usually for, corporate mergers, proprietary tech.
Right, private sector stuff.
Exactly, not for taxpayer-funded government buildings.
Yeah.
So their deployment here seems like a calculated method to keep the spending of public money hidden, to avoid public accountability until the project was, well, a done deal, a fait accompli.
And the suppression of information wasn't just limited to contracts, right? It actually extended to circumventing the laws themselves.
That's correct.
Lawmakers took the extraordinary step of exempting the Capitol Annex project from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA.
And that exemption, that's a massive deal. CEQA is, it's the bedrock law used by countless groups, environmentalists, neighborhood associations, you name it, to hold projects accountable. It demands environmental review, historic preservation standards.
So they just bypassed it.
By exempting themselves, the legislators essentially abolished the very standards they require all other entities in the state, public and private, to follow.
And they did this using a particular legislative mechanism called a trailer bill. For our listener, why is using a trailer bill for a major policy change like this considered so problematic?
Well, critics call it procedural abuse. Trailer bills are technically designed to implement minor changes related to the main state budget.
Okay.
But instead, they're often used as these sort of legislative vehicles to fast-track major policy changes, like exempting a billion-dollar construction project from environmental law without the usual public deliberation, without committee scrutiny, without the public debate that standard legislation normally requires.
It really feels like the ultimate example of political exceptionalism, doesn't it? Critics argued this was basically legislators saying, do as I say, not as I do, just abolishing crucial environmental standards for their own convenience, for political momentum, rather than maybe slowing down their pet project.
It certainly creates a strong impression, doesn't it, that there are two separate systems. One system with strict adherence to law for the governed, the public, and another system of legal exemptions for the political class.
And this pattern, this circumventing protocol, disregarding standard process, it isn't unique to state government, is it? Let's maybe pivot to the federal level and look at a contrasting but maybe similar example involving executive power and the use of public property for, well, political influence.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the White House ballroom expansion.
Right. This project involved a planned $250 million, 90,000 square foot ballroom addition to the historic White House East Wing. Now, while it was proposed as a necessary infrastructural upgrade, the process, again, revealed what looks like a similar disregard for essential public and regulatory protocol.
Yeah, our sources show that demolition work on the historic East Wing actually began before the project had received the required sign-off from key regulatory bodies. That includes the National Capital Planning Commission. What's the significance of that commission's review in this context? Why does that matter?
Well, the White House is obviously a structure of exceptional historic significance. The NCPC review is crucial because it's supposed to ensure any physical alteration respects that history, respects its public character. So preservation groups were urging officials to pause the work until the legally required public review processes were complete. They argued that jumping the gun suggests, well, prioritizing ambition over protocol and the preservation of what is, after all, the people's house.
And while the project was billed as privately funded, the funding mechanisms themselves introduced some pretty serious pay-to-play concerns, particularly around transparency.
That's right.
Major corporate entities, wealthy executives, they pledged millions. We're talking significant contributions from companies like Lockheed Martin, Google, and Blackstone Group CEO Stephen Schwarzman.
And the transparency issue really centers around recognition and potentially influence. Sources revealed that donors contributing $5 million or more may receive special recognition. This could include having their names permanently etched in the ballroom's brick or stone.
Permanently etched in the White House.
That's what the sources suggest. It effectively turns a portion of a public historic landmark into a kind of monument to private corporate wealth.
And compounding the issue, at least for the taxpayer, is that this money is funneled through a specific nonprofit organization, correct?
That's right. And because the funds are channeled through a nonprofit, those corporate donations become eligible for federal tax deductions.
Ah.
So while the project is technically privately funded, the American taxpayer still ends up subsidizing the donation via that tax deduction. This allows critics to argue that this is basically enabling, and I'm quoting again, oligarchs who want a piece of the spoils of the nation's most symbolic public property.
So whether we look at state politicians back in California hiding $1.1 billion expenditures behind, thousands of NDAs,
Yeah.
or federal projects potentially bypassing historic review processes to etch wealthy donor names into the walls of the White House, the pattern seems, well, unmistakable.
Indeed. We've seen consistent, repeated examples where massive public spending projects or projects conducted on public property suffer from these explosive cost overruns and, frankly, a shocking lack of adherence to basic transparency and accountability standards. The common thread seems to be the elite, operating by a different set of rules, insulating themselves from the fiscal consequences that the rest of the public inevitably has to endure.
We've detailed the billions lost, the secrets kept, surrounding how public funds are handled. So the core question for you, the taxpayer, it really remains. When public funds are treated like a blank check, and when public landmarks are used as platforms for private political recognition, what accountability mechanisms do we truly need? What systems are necessary to ensure that the people's money and the people's property truly remain managed in the public interest, and not just the interest of the politically connected? We leave you with that thought.